Hello everyone, today in this video we'll be discussing the fifth module of operating system, and this module is divided into three parts. First one is about the storage, and second one is about the protection, and third one is about the case study which is about Linux. Okay, so let's get started from the first topic, which is the secondary storage. And if you like the video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So magnetic disk is nothing but a set of CDs here, which are placed in circular form, and each of these CD is called as a disk or a platter. Okay, so and we'll have the cylinders here. Cylinder is defined as the combination of every CD here or the disk here. That's the combination is known as cylinder. And the next one is track. Track means each CD will be in this form, and see here this one CD from the cylinder, and from here we will have the tracks. This is one track, and this is second track, and this is third track. So in this image we have three tracks. Okay, and each track is divided into many sectors. This one track here, so here this one sector, this another one, and so on. Okay, these are all sectors, and this is the smallest part of the CD, which is a sector. Okay, so this about the structure. And one more thing which we need to know is the read and write head. Okay, means these are the heads and tails which are connected to the CD, due to which we can either write or read. Okay, so this is the structure of the magnetic disk secondary storage. Okay, so let's discuss the what is a disk structure. Mainly there are two types of disk structure. First one is CLV, which means constant linear velocity. It has equal density bits. Means see here, every bit is spaced equally here. Okay, every bit is spaced equally here. If you calculate any disk part here, means if you take any part of a disk here and calculate how many bits are there here in this area, that much will be same in any other area also. Okay, so the bit density is same in CLV, and whereas in CAV it's not the case, because here the density will be very much higher, because in small area bits are packed, and the same thing will be much larger in the um, outer tracks. Okay, so here the bit density reduces, but there is a uniformity. Okay, so these are the two types. CAV means constant average velocity. Okay, coming to the next topic, which is disk attachment. Since we have the disk here in the secondary storage, how this can be accessed and connected to the device which we are using. Okay, so there are three types mainly. First one is host attachment, which means if this is your laptop here, and here you have a port to attach to the secondary storage, that will be done by IO connection, input output connection, and it's stored in the secondary storage, which is here. It is with us only. Okay, it's not located at any other location. So this is known as host attached. The second one is network attached. In network attached, the servers will be at some other part of the world, and will be accessing the data and writing to it using networks. Okay, and third one is storage area network. Like this servers, there will be many servers here, and these all will be connected by using fiber channel. Okay, so this is known as storage area network. The next one is disk scheduling. See here, suppose that there are many cylinders here, and I want to access the data from this cylinder and this cylinder. So I have provided the numbers here 1, 2, 3, and 4. I have to access the data from 2 and 4. In which way I will access? First I will access 2, or I will access 4 first. If there are multiple cylinders, which is the combination which I will choose, which will give me the least time of accession, least time access. Okay, so by many algorithms you can determine that. The first one is FCFS, which is first come first serve. So the queue of see here, consider a disk queue with the request for IO to blocks on the cylinder 98, 183, 37, 122, 14, 124, 65, 67. If the data, if the disk head is initially at 53. So these are all the disk cylinders which are present, which is at 98 position, 183 position, 37 position, 122, and so on. Okay, there are many disks present here, which is the way I will access. If I go with the FCFS method, it will access the way it is specified to us. First, it will go to 98. The cylinder 98 is here, so it will go to here from 53. Suppose that 53 is here, it will go from 53 to 98 first. Then 183. Suppose that 183 is here, it will go to 183, then 37. 37 is here, it will go to 37, then 122, and so on. Then 14, 124, 65, and 67. So if you follow this method, means in the way they have specified, if you do the access, that's known as first come first serve algorithm. Okay, the second one is SSTF, that means shortest seek time first. In this, the question is same here, the queue is same, and the starting track is 53. What it will do, if the disk head is initially at 53, then the closest is 65, so it will see which is the closest to 53, it's 65. Then from 65, which is the closest among this, it's 67. From 67, which is the closest, it's 37. It's not 98, because from 67 to 98 it is 31, whereas from 67 to 37 it is just 30. Okay, so 37 is closest. When it comes to 37, the closest is 14. So in that way, which is the closest, it will find, and then it will access that one. Okay, this algorithm is known as shortest seek time first. The third one is scan. In scan, what it will do, it will start from 53 if it's going in the forward direction or backward direction, that we have to specify. If it's in the forward direction, it will see the next one after 53 what number comes, 65, then 67, then 98, then 122, then 124, and then 183. After it finishes 183, it will turn back. Okay, so I'll show you here. So it starts from 53 here, it reaches 183 in the order it goes. Then after that, the maximum is 199. It will go to 199. It will see if any are there in between 183 and 199. If it's not, it will bounce back. It will bounce back and search for the remaining ones. The remaining ones are 37 and 14. So it encounters 37 first, then it will encounter 14. Okay. So in this way, if you do, that's known as scan. Okay. See here. After finishing all, we'll be just remaining with 37 and 14. Okay, so first 37 comes, if we come back from 199, then 14 comes. Okay, so in that way, if you access, that's known as scan. The fourth one is circular scan. In circular scan, that's the same thing. We'll reach till 199, but we'll not come back from 199. We'll be starting from the other end. Means if we reach here, we'll be beginning from here. So in this case, 14 will be accessed first, then 37 will be accessed. Okay, that's the only difference. The fifth one is look. In look, the same thing is there, but it will not go till 199. Its maximum is 183, right? We need till 183 only. No more than 183 is present here. So we'll not go till 199. What we will do, after 183, we will come back directly to 37, then to 14. Okay. From 183, we'll come back to 37 and then to 14. Okay. We'll save the time which we used earlier of traveling till 199. That will be saved. Okay, if we use this algorithm, that's known as look. The last one is see look. In see look also it's the same thing, but here what we'll do, instead of 183 coming back to 37, what we'll do, the circular look means after 183 we'll be starting from here, which is first one is 14. So first we'll be starting from 14, then we'll go to 37, and then it will end the search. Okay, so the difference is from 183 it will not come back to 37, it will come in a circular way from 14 to 37. Okay, so these are the different scheduling algorithms. The next one is disk management. It's a theoretical topic, so there are some points which we need to know. The first one is data is written using header and tailor, and it writes the data in the empty sectors. There are two things which you need to know. It's written using header and tailor. See this one, if I show you here. These are the header and tailor. Data is written using this, and it's written in the empty slots. So empty slots will be checked for here. If it's empty slot, then the data will be written. Okay. By using this, the data will be managed efficiently, and it has the sector number and the error correcting code. Okay, there is a sector number in every header and tailor. So it's SN sector number, and ECC is the error correcting code. It's a code which is used to correct the errors if it's there. Okay, so these two information are present here. By using these two information, we can check if there is any error in the disk or not, and if it's free or not to store the data. Okay, and whenever we make change in the data in any part of the sector here, at that time we'll update the value of sector number and error correcting code value. Okay, these both values will be updated whenever we make any change to the data. The next one is partition. Partition means separating groups of sectors for storing different types of data. So see here is there is the cylinder here, and there are many sectors here. So each of the sector will be having separate groups here for storing different types of data. For example, if you want to create any file, for creating the file the instructions will be stored here, and for storing the user data the instructions will be stored here. Okay, in that way, if you do, it's called as partition. Next one is logical formatting. Logical formatting means we are creating a new file. For creating a new file, we need to know where the file is, where the file can be stored in the memory. Suppose that this is the memory, and these are the spaces used. So free spaces are here, here, and here. So while creating a new file, what we can do, we can check where we can store the file. Okay, so that is known as logical formatting. In this, we are checking where the free space is there. At that space, we are creating a new file. Okay, the next one is boot block. Boot block means to initialize the CPU, a bootstrap program is loaded. So where is the bootstrap program stored? This is the computer system. This is the ROM. Okay. In ROM, the bootstrap program is stored. When we open the computer, this program is loaded, switching on of the computer. Okay. So to show what the stages of switching on the computer, bootstrap program is loaded. But this process is very time consuming. So to avoid that, what we can do is we can make a copy of this program, and then we'll store it in the disk. Okay, in the secondary storage, and this will be very fastly accessed. Okay, so that's the code. This code where we write in the disk, suppose that this is the CD here. Okay, and from the ROM we are copying the bootstrap program to this part of the CD. Okay, then this block is known as boot block because it has the bootstrap program here. Okay, that block is known as boot block. The next one is bad block. Bad block means the block inside the CD where the data is damaged. Okay, where we cannot store the data because of some crashes made due to headers and tailors. The part of the CD is crashed. Okay, so there we cannot store any data. That block is known as bad block, and there are many algorithms to replace the bad block data to the empty blocks which are free, and there are many algorithms for protecting the damages happening and so on. Okay, that comes under the topic of bad block. The next one is swap space management. Firstly, what is swap? Swap means the data which is no more used by the ROM, that will be swapped with the data which is needed. Okay, so we'll have a swap space wherein we'll store the old data. Okay, so swap space management should be carried out so that very old data should be deleted. Okay, so that's known as swap space management, and an example given is for Solaris, which is an operating system, and it only swaps the page when it is very crucial. Okay, so it swaps the pages from the swap space, or utilizes the area of swap space only when it is very crucial. Okay, on the other hand, the other systems access the swap space much more frequent. Okay, to make the process execution faster. Okay, and this marks the end of the first topic, which is storage management. Okay, the second topic is protection. So basically, what is protection? Protection means the data which is stored inside our system should not be accessed by the unauthorized process. Okay, so for that, the goal of the protection is to ensure that only the process that have gained the proper authorization from the operating system can operate on the files. Only that process, suppose that there are two processes P1 and P2. If P1 is allowed to access the data, it can make changes to the files in the system. If P2 is not allowed to access the data, it cannot modify the data in the system. Okay, that is the goal of protection. And what is the principles of protection? This means that there are many processes here like P1, P2, P3. Each of the process will be given the least privileges. Means how much it is needed, that much only will be given to each process. Okay, means for carrying out the work, like for example, if P1 wants to print some data to the screen, it will be given the provision to read the data from the memory and permission to print the data onto the screen. Okay, these two will only be given to the process P1. Rest all things will not be given because it's not needed by the processor. Okay, so this is the principle of protection. And the third one is domain of protection. How much domain of the resources can be accessed by the object? Okay, so see here, if there is an object O1, and these are the resources available in the computer, how much the resources can be accessed by O1. Okay, so these if it's needed for accessing this one, it can access this much only. Okay, if it needs to access the third one, then it will be accessing the third one as well. Okay, so this is the domain of protection. So in this diagram we have the three objects, four objects, O1, O2, O3 and O4. Okay, and the domains are D1, D2 and D3. So which all operations can the objects O1, O2, O3 and O4 can perform? That's mentioned by these functions here: read and write. O1 can perform read and write, O2 can perform read and write, O3 can perform execution. Okay, that's only under the domain D1. If it's under the domain D1, it can perform the following operations. Whereas in the other domains like D2 and D3, it can share the objects also. So O4 is accessed by the domain D2 as well as D3. Okay, and it has the operation print. Okay, so both of these domains can use the object O4. Okay, and the process executing in D1, D2 and D3 can perform the functions on the objects. So actually the domain will not access, but the process which are in the domain, that will access the objects to perform the operations. Okay, coming to access matrix, it's a matrix which has the information of which domain can perform what operations on which objects. Okay, so see here in the rows we have D1, D2, D3 and D4, and objects are F1, F2, F3 and printer. These are the objects mentioned here, these are the domains here. Okay, and the cell in which the domain and object is there, that specifies what operation can this domain perform on this object. Okay, it is read operation. So domain D1 can perform the operation read on the objects F1 and F3, whereas in the domain D2 it can perform the print operation on printer, and D3 can perform read and execute on F2 and F3, and D4 can perform read and write on the object F2 and F3. Okay, so this is all about the access matrix. It gives the information about the domains and the objects and what are the functions which can perform by the domains on the objects. Okay, if I want to switch from domain D1 to D2, is it possible? That one will be specified by the cell here. If switch is there and D1 and D2 is there, then that means I can shift from domain D1 to D2. Coming to D2, from D2 which all domains can I shift? Can I shift to D1? No. Can I shift to D3? Yes. Can I shift to D4? Yes. Okay. So this is specified by the switch keyword. Okay. The next one is copy. Copy means, see here, as you can see, read star is there and write star is there. Wherever star is there, that domain can make this copy in the same column. Okay, so see here, since star is there, D2 can make read here also, here also. So it has made here in this case. Okay, so then D3 can also read the data in F2. Okay, that is specified by the star symbol here. Okay, the next one is the keyword owner. Owner gives the right to add or remove any right from the column. So see here, in this diagram we have owner for D1 F1. Okay, the domain D1 is having the ownership of the object F1. Okay, so it can add or remove any operation from this column. Okay, so it can remove this operation. It has removed from this place. Okay, the last one is the control keyword, by using which if you have specified D3 and D4 and in the cell we have written control, that means D3 can modify the contents of D4. So in our case the D4 had read and write here. See here, D4 and read and write in both of these cases, but in the second image we only have write here because D3 has a permission of to control D4. Okay, so it can modify the contents of D4. Okay, see here, there are different methods of implementing the access matrix. The first one is global table, second one is access list for the objects, and the third one is capability list, and the fourth one is lock key mechanism. Let's see one by one. First one is global table. In global table, we'll have all the list of the object and the functions and the domain which it belongs to. Okay, so it defines the domain, object, and the functions which can be performed on it. And if an operation M is carried on the object, it will be allowed only if this is found. If that object is found here, means it's registered in the global table, then only the operation M can be carried out, else it will not be allowed to carry it out. Okay, So that's the global table, and the second one is access list for the objects. See the table which I had discussed in the previous slide. In that we had the objects here and the domains and the functions here. So here it takes more space because empty spaces are included here, whereas in the access list we will not be including that. Only will be having the object name here and the domains here, okay, along with the functions performed. So this will discard the empty spaces. This is known as access list for the objects. The third one is capability list for the domains. Domains are here and the object names are here. That will just be written inside a table, okay. So this is known as capability list for the domains. The last one is the lock key mechanism. Each process will have a key here and objects will have lock here. So the process which has a key for the object, that only can be accessed, okay. So this is known as lock key mechanism. The next one is access control. Since the process P1 does not need all the resources here, to keep the other resources which the process P1 doesn't use safe from the unauthorized access, what we can do is privilege. Privilege means the process can access only those resources which are needed for the P1. Okay, in this way we can do the access control and keep the data which are not used by the P1 safe from the unauthorized access. Okay, and the next one is revocation of access rights. Revocation means cancellation, okay, cancellation of access right by the objects. So see here, there's an object here and it has some rights to what functions of it can be accessed by the process, okay. The functions like read and write, can it be accessed by the other process, yes or no? That right is defined by the object, okay. Now object can cancel this right also. If it cancels this right, it's known as revocation, okay. So there are four possibilities. Reacquisition means when once an object has cancelled the right, after that if a process asks for the right here, access right, then that is known as reacquisition. The second one is back pointers. In back pointers there are many objects here which will be having the pointers to it. So by using these pointers we can see if the access right has been cancelled or it is still remaining. If it is remaining, the pointer will be pointing, else it will not be pointing, okay. The next one is indirection. This is the same as the back pointer, but here we'll be having the data in the form of table. So here by looking at the table we can see if the objects are being still pointed to by the process or not. If it's pointed to, that means the revocation can be done when it's needed because the access is still valid, okay. That's indirection. And the last one is keys. In keys, what we'll have for object, for each object we'll have an object key, okay, and we'll have a master key here. This is known as master key, and the keys which match with the master key, there only the changes can be made, okay. If it doesn't match with the master key, changes cannot be made with the object key, okay. So see here, for each object there will be associated master key, and if the object key's bit pattern matches with the master key, then only changes can be made, else it cannot be made. So these were the four possibilities under evocation of the access rights. The next one is capability based system. In capability based system, we'll understand by using an example of Hydra. Hydra is a protection based system. In this consider an example of main function which is calling a function A here, and in A function we'll be using the capability based system Hydra. What it does is it will inspect the arguments passed in the function and it will determine if the process is valid to make changes here or not, okay. So it's a capability based system which is instructed about the possible access rights. So it will compare those rights with the arguments passed here. If it's valid, it will allow the process to make the changes, else it will not allow, okay. This implements the capability based system. The second example is Cambridge cap system. It's the same as Hydra, but it checks for the validity in two conditions: data capability and software capability. Here it will provide the access to the read, write and execute functions, and in software capability it will check the processor if they are allowed to make the changes or not, okay. So here two checks are carried out, whereas in the previous one only one check will be carried out if the arguments are valid or not. Third part of the module we have the Linux operating system. We'll do a case study here which we'll be learning some concepts about the Linux operating system. Firstly, its history. It's a free operating system and it uses Unix standards. It was developed in 1991. It's collaborated by users all over the world since it's open source software, and it runs on multiple platforms and it's free from the proprietary code, okay. So it's free to use by all the users. Coming to Linux kernel, its first version is 0.01, which was developed in 1991, but it had extremely limited device drive support. The second version, 1.0, had support for running IP. The third version, which is the final version, still used till now, has the final PC only Linux kernel. Okay, so it will be used. It can be used only in the PC. Okay, this Linux kernel. Then Linux 2.0 was released in 1996. It added support for multiple architecture. It had improved the memory management and the performance. Okay, and a Linux system is Berkeley Standard Distribution License, and its GNU libraries are used, and it's collaborated by all the users over the world. Okay, this is about the Linux system. And Linux distributors means when we distribute the Linux system to the other devices, at that time it's a ready to install package, and it's compatible in and it uses many compatible file formats. Okay, and Linux licensing means it uses the GNU's general public license. So the public can use the Linux license, but use it to make the proprietary software. Means by using the open source free software, they cannot create the paid software. That's the Linux licensing. Then design principles. Linux software is a multi-user and multitasking system. It implements the Unix standards, and the main goals are speed and efficiency. It's POSIX certified. Okay, and the components of the Linux system are the kernel, which handles the physical resources close to the software, and it has the system libraries which define a set of functions. And by using that and system utilities, it's able to perform the task which it is expected to. Okay, so system utilities means the tools which perform the specialized task. Okay, like debugging or executing. The next one is the kernel modules. So see, this is the kernel. It's divided into many modules here, which perform the independent task here. Okay, so sections of the kernel code that can be compiled, loaded, and unloaded independent from the rest of the kernel. So these perform the task independently of the rest of the kernel. Okay, and there are three components under the kernel modules. The first one is memory management. Since there are many modules, the first one, which is module management, is needed. So it supports the load and unloading of the kernels and manages them. Okay, okay. And the next one is device registrations. Suppose that a new device is connected to the computer here. At that time, it will inform the kernel that a new device has been connected to the computer. Okay, and the third one is conflict resolution. It prevents the module clashes. It resolves the conflicts and prevents the interfacing. Okay, the next one is process management. When see here, what is process actually? The process management means this is the process P1, and from this a new process is created, which is the child process P2. Okay, when that is created, three things are coming along with that. That means three unique things which are coming along with the child process are PID, process environment, and process context. So what are these? PID is the unique ID to identify the child process. Process environment is characteristic of the parent process, and the process context is the current information of the processor, which means the information regarding the child process. Means how many process has been performed, what are all the data which it has executed on, and what are the time taken and other information. Okay, that comes under process context. And process and threads are nothing but the threads are the same process with parallel execution. So if the process P1 is there, you can have multiple threads for it, which is performing the task simultaneously. Okay, the next one is scheduling. The scheduling means allocating of the different jobs to the CPU. Okay, kernel sometimes wants not to be interrupted. Okay, see here, if the kernel is performing an important task, at that time it should not be interrupted, but it will be default interrupted by many ways, like for example by an explicit call to the kernel, or any page fault, and hardware interrupt can also call the kernel. So to avoid that, it can use two methods. Non-preemptive, that means the kernel, when it's performing in the important task, at that time it cannot be interrupted. Okay, the second one is interrupt disable option. Interrupt disable option, when the kernel is performing the important task, at that time all the interrupts are disabled. Okay, so that no function can make a call to the kernel. Okay, until it completes its task. So there are two types of process scheduling algorithms: the time sharing and real time. In time sharing, equally the time will be shared between the different processes, and the second one is real time, means here the priorities matter. Okay, so the higher priority will be executed before the lower priority process. Okay, and both of these can be implemented using FIFO algorithm and round robin algorithm. And if the kernel just wants to perform one task at a time, it can disable symmetric multiprocessing, which is also known as parallel processing, so that kernel will be able to just execute just one code at a time. Okay, The next one is memory management. Memory is managed by dividing the pages. So 64 KB will be divided into 32, and that 32 will be divided into 16, and so on. Okay, by dividing into pages, it will become much more easier to handle them. Okay, so there's an algorithm, buddy heap algorithm, which keeps the track of the available pages. Okay, and virtual memory maintains the address of free space together for creating a set of free pages. So see here, what does this mean? If there are this is the memory here, there are many spaces here, some are empty, some are not empty. Okay, so what does virtual memory do? It will select all the empty spaces and it will make a single page here. Okay, it will look like this is a single page, but it will be the mixture of many pages here. So how to know which part this belongs to? That we can know by the lookup table. In the lookup table, the physical address of this is known as physical address, this is a logical address. So the translation from the logical address to the physical address is done by the lookup table. Okay, so see here, table is used in the translation of logical to physical address and vice versa. Okay, and when a fork is called, means child process is made from the main process, from P1, child process P2 is made. At that time, all the data of parent process is copied to the child process. Okay, so it has all the existing data of P1. Okay, also, virtual memory relocates the memory from the physical memory out of the disk when it's out of the disk when it's no longer needed. Okay, so if a lot of time passes and some data is not used, it will free up the space. Okay, and there are two types. There are two parts. VM memory consists of two parts: static and reminder. See here, this is the virtual memory. Static part means all the used part here, which has the table page table references, and the remaining part can be used for any specific purposes. Okay, so this part is known as reminder, and this one is known as static. Okay, and the general sequence of writing the data using the virtual memory is: from the Linux system, we'll be looking at the table, and from the table, we are loading the value in the virtual memory. And virtual memory will write the data into a file, and that file will be stored in the secondary memory. Okay. The reverse is also possible. If you want to read some data, we'll be fetching the data from the memory to a file. That file will be loaded in the virtual memory, and from the physical address of this address, that will be converted to the logical address, and that will be displayed on the screen. Okay, and for carrying out this process, ELF is used to process and store the multiple different domain tasks. Suppose that this is my code here. There are two parts, me including the function in the code itself, or me calling the function from the library. Okay, if I call the function from the library, it's known as dynamic linking. Or if I include the function which I have to use in the program inside the code only, at that time it's known as static linking. Okay, so see here, in static, library code is present inside the main code which I am writing here, and in the dynamic linking, library function is called whenever needed. Okay, the next one is the file systems. In file systems, the files are organized in a single memory space. The individual files are known as file objects, and the whole system is known as the file system object. Okay. So in Linux, the ex2fs file system is used, which locates the particular data belonging to a file. Okay. So it performs the allocation in smaller unit, and it does not use fragments. Okay. There are many empty spaces here. Those empty spaces will be combined by the um, file system, and they will be allocated in a separate space, and that's what the main task of the virtual memory. So file system uses the virtual memory to carry out this task. Okay, and Linux proc file system does not store the data, but it has information about what to do, means how to compute the contents required by the IO operation. Okay, the next one is input output. See here, Linux device oriented file system access the disk to two caches. So since there are two types of memory, virtual memory and physical memory, for each of these there are different type of cache. For the virtual memory there is page cache, and for the physical memory there is buffer cache. Okay, and there are three classes of the devices: block devices, which are completely independent to access the data, and second is character devices, which has little limitations, but the thing is same, that they can access the data. And networking devices means which devices are located remotely. The Linux uses the network devices to access the data between them. Okay, wireless connection. Okay, and the this is the block diagram. In this, the file system has the buffer cache here, and the user application uses the character device file. Okay, and they are connected via network here to the remote location where there is network socket and the data. So the data is accessed from the remote location to the user application, which then stores in the file system. Okay, And the main difference between the block device and character device is that the block device can write any data at any point of time, whereas in character device there has to be registered the type of the data that is to be written in the cache buffer. Okay, so without registration or without informing prior to the compiler that what's the data which is going to be written, you can't write in character data, whereas in the block devices you can write any type of data. Okay, the last topic is inter-process communication. That means if there are multiple processes here, they are sharing some data or they are doing the task on independent data. At that time, each process have to inform the other process that if it has made any change to the data, so that the other process will also make the changes to the data if the data is being shared or if the other process needs the data in the future. Okay, so that's the inter-process communication. There are many ways to make the data. First one is pipe mechanism. Pipe mechanism means this is the parent process, this is the child process. Okay, in between them there will be connection like a pipe where if the changes are made here, that will be noticed in the other end, and vice versa also. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is shared memory. If you have to pass the data, the best way is to use the shared memory so that each of the process will be able to view what are the changes being made. The third one is synchronization. Synchronization means if a process is making a change here, at the same speed only the other process should be able to receive the change. Okay, if there is no synchronization, some data can be lost. Okay, and the last one is network structure. This for the process which are operating at remote locations. So in the remote location, the data is passed through the network structures.